Okay, everyone, it is 11 a.m. and we will begin. My name is David Dragich. I am the Marketing Account Executive for World Synergy. Thank you so much for joining us today for today's webinar, 5 Signs Your Company Has Outgrown QuickBooks. We are really excited for today's program, and we have a lot of exciting material and discussion prepared. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. After its conclusion, we will send out a link so that everyone who is registered can reference the video for talking points and discussion. Participants are now on mute, but if you are logged in online, you should be able to see our title slide. Feel free to submit a question throughout the discussion using the Q&A button located in the middle of your webinar screen. We will have time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Okay, and that about sums up our housekeeping. So without further ado, I would like to start and begin introducing our panelists. So to begin, our special guest is Laura Keck. She is CPA, Chief Financial Officer with Checkpoint Surgical Incorporated. Our moderator is Mr. Steve Crisfalusi, Strategic Growth Analyst with World Synergy. And as mentioned, my name is David Dragich, and I will be your host this morning. Just going into our agenda here, what we'll be covering throughout the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to go over a brief synopsis. Why we're here? Why are we discussing the 5 signs of your business outgrowing QuickBooks as an accounting solution? We will then go into a case study where we'll learn more about Laura and Checkpoint Surgical Incorporated. And as we discuss in an open discussion, we'll identify what their signs and symptoms were as they were going through a growth stage, right? And trying to use a solution that really wasn't cutting the cake, so to speak. So we'll go through their signs and symptoms. Briefly after that, we will go over a few supporting statistics and results, and we'll have time for a Q&A. Now, I would like to move and hand things over to Steve Crisfalusi, Strategic Growth Analyst with World Synergy, to kind of kick things off and talk a little bit about World Synergy briefly. Steve?
Thanks, David. Appreciate the introduction there. Welcome, everybody. We're really glad that you're able to join us today. Before we get started, I wanted to provide a little background on who World Synergy is. So we've been working with small and mid-sized businesses for over 20 years now. And our approach has always been to help our clients really integrate marketing, technology, and application solutions with the overall objective of helping our clients reach their goals, grow, and thrive as a business. Now, over the years that we've helped, one of the areas where we've really had an impact is helping our clients transition and implement new software solutions. Having the right software solution in place is really critical for a business. It helps to create efficiencies, greater visibility into the different areas of the business, and really can be a great facilitator for growth. And whether that's an accounting system, whether it's marketing automation, whether it's a new ERP system, they all really play an integral role in your business. But one of the things that we've learned is that most businesses really aren't sure if or when they should be looking at making a change like this. And that's why we're here today, is to share with you some of the telltale signs that it's really time to look at upgrading your software. Now, to help us do this, we've asked Laura Keck from Checkpoint Surgical to join us. And she's going to share her story about migrating to a new software solution, provide some insight into what they being Checkpoint as a business experienced before, during, and after that process. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Laura Keck. Laura, how are you today? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
Good, good. So Laura, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Checkpoint Surgical?
Sure. I started my career in Big Four accounting. Actually, it was Big Six back then. And I've since spent my career with a mix of public accounting and private industry, primarily focusing on high growth and entrepreneurial type companies, ranging from startup to middle market. I've been at Checkpoint Surgical for 5 years now, and Checkpoint Surgical is a venture-backed medical device manufacturer. We have over 10 million in sales. Historically, we've seen about 30% revenue growth per year, but we're at a bit of an inflection point right now. We just received a new equity investment to help fuel growth. So we are anticipating higher growth in the next few years, and that's via new product development and product launches, as well as expanding our sales force. And as we all know, that to go along with that, to support that growth, we need to kind of build up our infrastructure at the same time. Right. So we've been hiring like crazy. Right now we've got 60 employees, but I feel like that changes on a daily basis. We've got a lot more planned, and it's changed so much since I started 5 years ago. It's an exciting time.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Well, that's some excellent background, Laura. Thank you. And I think that leads right into what we're here to talk about today, with all of the growth that you've experienced just in your time with Checkpoint. Can you share with us a little bit about how Checkpoint was operating from an accounting software perspective when you first came on?
Sure. So we have been using QuickBooks Desktop. We had it on our server and used multi-user mode so that people could log in on the same database. Because we have a contract manufacturer, so we're not manufacturing our own products. Okay. We don't have inventory builds, but because we're med device, we have other requirements such as lot tracking. So QuickBooks is not capable of doing inventory very well, including lot tracking. So we used Rapid Inventory as a third-party app for inventory. Okay. And we've been using that, it was already in place when I got here, and we've used it for several years thereafter. Got it.
So using two different systems, QuickBooks and Rapid Inventory, what was that like? I mean, obviously the two systems aren't the same. They're kind of designed to talk to each other a little bit, but what were some of the challenges in utilizing those two kind of separate systems?
Where should I start? Well, we had the web connector, right, for QuickBooks on our server to sync Rapid Inventory, but I don't know why, but it would crash periodically. So there was just constant calls to you guys, frankly, to help us reset things because it didn't talk well. And I don't know if that was because it was on a server or multi-user, but what happened was you can never tell, to process sales orders, for instance, you had to make sure it was synced with Rapid Inventory before you could process a sales order to make sure the inventory is there and all that goes through. And so it became inefficient and kind of nerve-wracking at times because it just kept breaking. And then when the connector wasn't working, then everything was down.
Right.
And COVID only made that situation worse working from home. It wasn't cloud-based. I mean, Rapid Inventory was, but we couldn't just VPN in. We had to remote in for faster service to the server. It was not an efficient process. And you couldn't get the inventory reports out of QuickBooks. You had to go to Rapid Inventory to get any detail out of it. So it wasn't ideal.
Got it. So you bring up an interesting point with COVID. And I think most people would agree that COVID was very impactful in changing the way that we operate as businesses. especially when it comes to the remote workforce. So share with us a little bit about some of the challenges or what you faced when we were working from a remote perspective, and still being able to operate efficiently utilizing the different softwares and systems that you had in place.
Right. So aside from the difficulties of having to remote into QuickBooks to process, which was slow and well, we all know, but aside from that, there were so many manual processes we had that required, QuickBooks just wasn't cutting it anymore. So in terms of AP approvals or invoicing, there was a lot of data that had to be emailed back and forth to one another. We might have previously in the office just, walked down to somebody's office or handed them the papers, but here we had to then scan from home, email to other people. It just became very inefficient. And I was so wishing we had had a cloud-based system when all that started. It would have made it a lot easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it was just a little over a year ago when you and Checkpoint decided it was time to pull the trigger and look at upgrading your business system, upgrading your accounting system, and you made that transition to NetSuite, which is a cloud-based solution. Other than some of the things that you've already mentioned, were there any, major catalysts that really, forced your hand or that were impactful in you making that decision to make the transition?
Right. Yeah. So we had always planned on moving at some point to NetSuite. We weren't anticipating doing it so soon, but our hand was forced to a certain degree because Rapid Inventory would not support an upgraded version of QuickBooks. So we were stuck on the 17 version.
Okay.
And then Intuit, they do this periodically every year. They stop supporting the prior year, prior year's versions. And so we received notice that they were going to stop supporting 17. And it put us in a bit of a panic because of it not even working all that great, right? All of the servers crashing with the connectors. So we felt we had to make the move, and we did. And in retrospect, I probably waited too long anyway, aside from that fact, now being on the other side of it and seeing how more easily our lives are working with NetSuite. I probably should have done it before, but I always struggled with I struggled with the decision like everybody does. When is the right time? So, but I probably should have done it sooner.
So expand on that a little bit, if you can. That's a great statement, and that's really why we're here talking today. Is you said we probably waited a little too long. What makes you say that? What were some of the things that kind of drives you to feel that way?
There's a lot of them, and I'll start with what impacted me personally the most, because as the CFO, most of what I'm dealing with is the reporting more so than entering transactions. So anybody who's worked in QuickBooks knows that the reporting has limitations, and so there was a lot. Well, basically all of our reports were exported to Excel, and then we were either exporting two different reports and doing lookups to combine the data, or manually adding fields that we couldn't have in QuickBooks and then throwing things into pivot tables. It just was a lot of manual manipulation of the data. And there were so many times where I just was like, I just want to get to the database in QuickBooks, but I couldn't, I wasn't advanced enough to figure that out. I don't know if it's even possible.
Right.
I think in retrospect, when I start thinking about how many times I looked at those user uploaded reports that QuickBooks has, where other users in the community can upload, searching for the right report because I couldn't get it any other way, and it wasn't always successful. But if you're exporting a lot to Excel and manipulating data to get to the right information and
Right.
lookups, all of that, pricing levels. There was no way we could find to get a pricing level report by customer.
Oh, wow.
When we want to
Okay.
raise prices and evaluate all of our customers, there was no way to just say, what does each customer have for pricing it?
Right.
So those things
Right.
became, overwhelming as
Yeah.
our business got more complex.
Absolutely. And I have to imagine as a venture-backed organization that, the financial reporting, it was a big factor, or is a big component of what you have to provide as the CFO.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And not even just the income statement balance sheet, but the sales reports and how sales by customer, by territory, by region, by sales rep, there's just so many ways we wanted to look at the data.
Yeah.
And it just required a lot, we talk to the board about that all of the time. It's not just, we're not a company that just needed to know what our income statement looked like.
Right. And rather than just being able to know that the data was there and run a report, you had to become an Excel expert.
And I really have. I'm pretty impressed with myself and pivot tables and all the lookups.
Absolutely. Right.
It sounds like with the amount of hurdles just to get basic data. I mean, these are KPIs that you measure the growth of your business, right? And to do all this runaround to just pull a basic information, exporting more room for error, and all these other hurdles, third parties not updating, and then you throw a global pandemic into the mix.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, which one of the straws broke the camel's back? You think all of them did, right? So
Exactly.
it sounds a little bit of a disaster to be honest, but I'm glad you made it through.
Thanks.
That's right.
Not without some stress, I don't.
Sure. So, then Laura, on the timeline of your journey with the accounting system and the software and all of that. So it was about a year and a half ago, give or take, that you had made the decision to migrate from QuickBooks into NetSuite. Okay, and for all those different reasons. So let's talk a little bit about that, because moving to a new software solution is often looked as a very daunting undertaking. People are often worried or nervous, I should say, about something like that. So tell us a little bit about what it was like for you and for Checkpoint going through that process of migrating to the new accounting system.
Well, at first, admittedly, it was terrifying. The thought of it, based on what I've heard and my experiences doing other software implementations. But I have to say, though there was work to be done, we moved slowly because that was my mandate, right? I don't have a lot. My whole team doesn't have a lot of time, so we're going to move slowly. And it was interesting and really helpful because we had to look at every single one of our processes and evaluate how we want them to work. And that was a really valuable process for me and us as a company as we grow to look at AP approvals. Before we were just, I don't even know how our accounting associate had the mind space to keep track of everything. She had to email or give the bills for people to approve and then keep track of what was still outstanding and remind them and then enter them into QuickBooks. Here, we set up the workflow where she enters them first and then it automatically routes through the approvals. But part of the implementation process was looking at who should it go to? How much can each level approve, and how does that work? And so, for me, I loved going through all of that and evaluating everything we do. But I have to say, other than taking the time to work through those and clean up our data, it was much. I don't want to just say easy, but it was much easier than I thought. It wasn't as onerous. I mean, you guys did most of the hard lifting during that process.
Well, thank you.
And we also went from, sorry to interrupt.
No, please continue.
In the past, we had our engineering team, we only use POs for things related to products or inventory. And so our engineering team, because they didn't have logins to QuickBooks, because we couldn't limit their permissions and we didn't have that many seats, they would do POs in Excel and then send those to accounting. And then we would enter them and keep track of them. And then everything was like duplicate workarounds. And so I was concerned. I wasn't concerned. I was kind of excited about it. But now all of our employees have logins. Well, we're implementing CRM right now, so not yet, but they will. Everybody will have logins. But anybody here in the corporate office working on transactions has a login. And the engineers are now entering the POs themselves. And at first I was thinking, are they going to not be happy about the additional tasks they now have to do? But as it turns out, I think everybody really loves it because they have the control and the visibility to see. They can see what POs they have outstanding. They can track them. They can do reporting on them. It's. I think everybody has appreciated the visibility and control they've gotten over the data that they're responsible for.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine moving from such a manual process into something that's much more automated and straightforward. Not only has to be a time saver, but there's that removal of just human error,
right?
And all that manual entry and duplicate entry.
I mean, I joke about it, but it's like we're a real company now. We're doing it right. NetSuite records accounting transactions as they should be recorded. Inventory fulfillment on a sales order is one step, and then it sits in a queue waiting to be invoiced. So revenue is not automatically recorded. It waits for the item to be invoiced so you can add shipping. It's just done properly versus QuickBooks. It just automatically creates an invoice. Then you have no way to know which ones to look at to modify the shipping or the extra double checks or whatever. So it works like a real company. Our processes with our employees are working like it properly should finally.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So with some of those processes that have improved and some of that automation, what has that visibility allowed you as a business to do from a decision-making perspective?
To me, it's about real-time data and multiple people having it. And as an example, before, because nobody really had access to QuickBooks except the accounting team and the sales operations team, the VP of sales, as well as some of the regional managers, would call our sales ops team multiple times a day. Where are sales at today? What are they at today? And they would have to report them. And now the efficiency of there's an automatic report that gets sent out multiple times a day to a certain group of people. So they don't even have to, there's no calling anymore. They can see it in their email. Everybody can log in and look at the dashboard to see the status of the company. Information is just so much easier to get at, and that absolutely affects decision making and the speed in which we're able to do that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So it really sounds like taking that step back and reviewing the processes like you described and kind of looking at how the business had operated to date and being able to determine, okay, where can we make improvements within the system, really has afforded you just leaps and bounds of better data, better decision making, and just really helped you operate as a whole more effectively.
Right. So, and I want to add to that, aside from gaining efficiencies and everything we just talked about, it's positioned us to be able to scale the company quickly. It's absolutely necessary to have that in place for us to be able to do that. And I'm so happy that we did it when we did, because now that's the most important piece for me that I got out of this, was that now we're positioned to scale. We can do it now.
Wow. Yeah, Laura, I mean, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on, you mentioned a little bit about plans, and you had been planning on eventually making some sort of a switch. And could you elaborate a little bit on what, Checkpoint's goals were, right? What were your plans? And obviously you were in some sort of a growth stage already, but could you get into a little bit more detail around what that scale looked like?
In terms of the decision to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, having aggressive plans in place and growth and understanding that, well, frankly, this solution just isn't working anymore. So it seemed to be a no-brainer at that point to then make a switch, something that would grow with you.
Right. So, as we develop new products, and even with the current products and the state of affairs of supply chain issues right now going on, we've always just bought, this is just an example, but we've always just purchased finished goods from our manufacturer. But because of the state of affairs, we're now pre-buying components and raw material, because we're fronting the money. We want to make sure we can get it. So we might buy, so now we're doing that. We need to figure out, how are we going to, is this an inventory build? Is this a kit? We have more complex inventory issues now. And if we had not moved to NetSuite, I think Rapid Inventory might have been able to do inventory builds and kits, but I did not even want to look into it, to be honest. It was just not a great system to me. So looking at revenue growth, the number of transactions we process, things like the inventory builds, as we grew, the complexity grows as well. And another example that's life-changing really with NetSuite is our customers are hospitals. And so we have hospital systems like the Cleveland Clinic, and then we also have individual hospitals like Cleveland Clinic main campus, Cleveland Clinic Avon. So that's an example. And in QuickBooks, we use the customer job function because we like to report based on the system. But we also want to report on the hospital. So, but that had so many limitations, such as sales tax. You could only use the sales tax of the parent or the customer, regardless of the ship to location of the job, the hospital. So when we process invoices, we had, our accounting associate had a list of hospitals to keep in mind, to go into, to change the tax rate individually, manually on those that didn't flow through. It's incredible. It's incredible to think about when you are scaling the business. You just can't have those kinds of manual requirements.
Right.
It needs to be seamless. And with NetSuite, parent-child is so easy, right? And when I started with the company, we were processing, I want to say 4 sales orders a day, which seems unbelievably small. Right now, we're doing close to 20 a day.
Wow.
And we have so many more customers. So as the company scales and all of those things become more complex, it just becomes more and more of a necessity. And why I say we waited too long is you want to catch it before a little bit before you really need it, because once you need it, it's not too late, but it just makes it harder. I wish we would have done this a little sooner.
Right. You had mentioned Rapid Inventory might have been able to pull it off. And really, just from, proper, best organizational practices. I mean, this is the business we're talking about here, right? And that's a huge if that we're going to say, well, it might be able to pull it off. We'll see.
I'll look into it.
So,
the fact that it wouldn't support more updated versions of QuickBooks is a bad sign, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, yeah, exactly.
It's the same thing with, websites going, no longer being going to be service reps at wherever the platform third party is, that they're no longer going to be hosting that. There's going to be no more support. It's usually a good sign that you need to do something about it. So this is a very similar situation.
So Laura, you mentioned scalability, and that's a big part of why you migrate to a new software solution, a new business system. So you've been now in NetSuite for a little over, about a year, give or take. So what can you talk about the differences in the scalability of the system today and how it's helped your business versus what you came from? And I know you've offered a little bit of insight already with some of that, but anything else specific about that you can?
I would say, I don't know if it talks about scalability as much as just the ease of use and the ability to bring new users on. Has been lovely. I love NetSuite. It's intuitive. It's user-friendly. I feel like most of our questions that we have for you guys when, after we went live had more to do with our specific customizations we did rather than how does NetSuite work. You pull up a transaction and then there's a link with the vendor name and you just click on the link. Reporting, you can drill down. And so being able to bring users on without this onerous training requirement is the key, is a huge key in being able to scale quickly, as well as having the data correct and the right data for our customers. We can set them up how we want. We can customize it. We can add fields for things that are important to us. Right. Because when you grow, you don't just get more quantity of transactions, but everything just gets more complex. And so having the ability to customize it, bringing users on easily, and having them be able to use it pretty quickly has been really great. And I do think that we're in a great position to just be able to run with this. Absolutely.
I think that speaks right to the scalability of the system. And as Checkpoint grows, as you add more people, as you add more customers, and really as the nature of your business evolves, to have a solution that you don't have to question, that you can rely on its adaptability to pivot with your business.
And another point on that is that we've decided to implement the CRM portion of the software. As far as I understand it, it came with it. We just didn't use it right away, and we're in the process of implementing that so all of our salespeople can use it as well. And it seamlessly ties with historical customer information that they can now access themselves. It will turn prospects into customers. I mean, talk about scaling it. It's great. It's real-time data for everybody, including those in the field.
That's a whole other webinar in itself. It's just CRM. So.
Right. No, that's great. That's great. So if you had to, sum up your overall experience in, kind of transitioning from QuickBooks to NetSuite, what would you say?
I thought it was seamless. I thought it was great, and I have to thank you guys for that. And there was training before we went live for each different department, and there were some write-ups. Obviously, NetSuite has its own training, but the thing I loved that helped so much was having one of your team members on an all-day Zoom call for a couple of days that people could just jump on at any time. You just jump on and ask your questions. It was brilliant. I mean, I have said this to other vendors, during open enrollment for benefits, just have a Zoom call. People just jump on and ask questions and can jump off. You just have somebody there available. It went so much more smoothly than I thought it would. So it's been, as far as I'm concerned, a very easy transition.
Awesome. And what has it meant to you and your team? I mean, just from taking things off of your plate and creating some of that efficiency, within your
Yeah, I mean, right, just thinking about the AP itself, right? Poor Michelle, was chasing people down and keeping track of what bills came in because she couldn't record them in QuickBooks because there's no way to see whether they're approved or not. And she just enters them and you can see where they're at. It's just been, the efficiency has been wonderful. So it has really improved our lives.
That's great. That's great. And then if there was, one final thought that you wanted to share with the, people that have joined us today from your perspective on this topic, what would that be?
So I guess probably that you can stay on QuickBooks a lot longer than you probably should. It's hard to know. QuickBooks has its place. It sure does. It's great for startups. It's great for companies that don't have a very complex setup. It's great for people who don't have a professional accounting team. It has its place, and it's easy even for me. I struggled with that decision and probably stayed on longer than it should because you can make it work. But the process of implementing NetSuite was not as onerous as I was afraid of.
Yeah.
There's financing that was available that made it very attractive.
Yeah.
And it just has taken us to the next level. So you can stay with QuickBooks and you can make it work for a long time. So just keep that in mind, that it's not always the right answer.
Absolutely. Well, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information and for allowing us a glimpse into your journey throughout this process and throughout the moving from QuickBooks into NetSuite.
I'm happy to help, especially because I struggled with that. So I'm happy to help others kind of evaluate, by providing sharing my experience. I'm happy to help others because it's a question that we struggle with. So happy to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one final question for you, if you had to think about one of the biggest things that prevented you from moving forward with a software transition, what do you think that was? Leading up to making the decision, what was the biggest thing that prevented you from pulling the trigger prior?
So my caveat is that we had planned to do this. So it was in the expenditure was already in my forecasts. We ended up accelerating it a little bit sooner, but it was already in there. So for us, it wasn't the cost factor, it was the time factor. And the thought of implementing it when you already have all of these workarounds and manual processes, the thought of doing an implementation on top of that is scary. So that was probably the biggest factor that, maybe not make the decision sooner, but it's also the one that probably should have made me make it sooner.
Right. Exactly. Great. Well, thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Happy to help.
Absolutely. So, David, if you want to pull the information back up.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a few supporting stats here. Just confirm my screen is showing. There we go.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do now is have David share some statistics around migrating from QuickBooks to NetSuite, and some of the things that other businesses that have been surveyed have provided insight into that can sometimes help alleviate the concerns that Laura shared, or that a lot of businesses out there are feeling before making a decision like this.
Yeah, just really briefly, Laura, said what she had to say, and really great insight into her experience and Checkpoint Surgical's experience transitioning, and really the whole point of this webinar is to support the fact that, they're not the only company, right? This isn't a one-time thing. This is a very common issue that companies face and if you've been following along, there's a lot of symptoms and hurdles just to make this one platform work, right? That seems to be, efficient from a 30,000 foot view, right? Rather affordable and intuitive. But there's a lot more under that surface where it becomes starts to take a toll on how you manage, your business, and especially during a phase of growth. So just a few stats I wanted to touch on being that after folks, and this is specifically after moving from QuickBooks over to NetSuite, companies this is in manufacturing and distribution, experienced over 118% revenue growth by year 2. Now, earlier in our discussions, we had talked about prepping for this webinar, how there could be different variables that would attribute to this statistic, basically being number one, efficiencies working with the team and users, being able to go in and make their own, plug in their own information, and just cutting a lot of those corners around having to throw a piece of paper on Michelle's desk and, hey, did you get that piece of paper? And just kind of a lot of beating around the bush just to get a simple process in place. Another interesting stat being, 84% of employee efficacy improvement, efficiency improvement, also kind of lumped into that 118%, right? But just the efficiencies alone, you can look at stats and numbers on a piece of paper, but I think Laura could also attest to the fact that the lack of stress and headache at that point also takes into account too, right? That removing that, now you can just do your job and then focus on planning for the future and planning for growth, as opposed to scrambling to get a report.
Yeah, Laura, what is some of the efficiency gains been since migrating over to NetSuite? I can only imagine, based on what you've laid out for us, over the past conversation here, that it has to be a ridiculous amount of efficiency.
Yeah, right. It's hard to quantify exactly for us, and as we still are learning how to do things, I can only imagine it's going to get even more efficient over time. Just from every process, sales order processing, reporting, AP processing, all of that. I think we've gained big strides in efficiency.
Awesome. And then obviously, David just ties right into the next statistic about order processing improvement percentage.
How did she know? 81% order processing improvement. I mean, these are significant stats, right? I mean, these aren't 20%, these aren't 10%, which, in scale, depending on the size of the company, could mean a lot, right? I mean, that's almost enough of a percentage to make a difference, right? So these are big numbers. Moving forward, this next slide, just to kind of reiterate the fact that this isn't a one-time scenario. This isn't an exclusive to Checkpoint Surgical, but surveying organizations that had transitioned over to NetSuite. The key indicator being that they switched because they needed better reporting and tracking. I mean, half of our discussion revolved around that subject matter. Another large one is that 66% switched because they just needed more complex accounting software. I mean, QuickBooks just wasn't cutting it. It served its purpose, but then as if you were following along during this presentation, you started to see some trends from the outside looking in that now, you're already given these hurdles to just do a simple process. And now, I mentioned already the global pandemic, but that's real. I mean, some businesses didn't even make it out of that because, of their infrastructure. But especially if you're having aggressive plans for growth, the reality is your company is only as strong as your infrastructure. And in order to achieve those goals, you need to be prepared, frankly.
Yep.
I would add to this point, the inventory limitations that QuickBooks has is the big one here.
Absolutely. Well, I think, Laura, you you provided some great insight into, not just some of the limitations that you ran into with QuickBooks from an accounting perspective, but also just some of the limitations that you faced in its, lack of kind of peripheral systems or peripheral abilities with the CRM, with the inventory and all of that. So, the complex accounting needs that people made the switch because of, and a lot of, you described yourself, you had to become an Excel expert to be able to provide some reports, but to tie in all these other aspects of Checkpoint right into the accounting system and have that reporting be real time and have it be accurate without the manual entry and that potential for human error, it had to have been huge.
And right, and having so many more users have visibility on their own to it has been a huge part of that too.
Absolutely. Great.
Perfect. Well, we are going to be, we're coming up on time, but I really briefly, I wanted to just kind of go over, right, these 5 signs we touched on. Obviously, this was a very much an open discussion, but if you're still with us and you've been following along, as a quick recap here, what we discussed and focused on the most being, number 1, limited reporting capabilities, no real-time data. You find yourself relying too much on spreadsheets and workarounds and third parties just to make one system work, and even then you're compromising. Number 2, being excessive manual processes that are costly and error-prone, right? Constantly exporting different spreadsheets, sending them to Joe and then to Jane, and then people are making changes. There's just too much room for error. And at the end of the day, you're focused on running a business and growing a business. Number 3, there's no real inventory management, right? And especially if you're trying to keep track of inventory and then you're relying on a third party that decides to not update anymore, then what do you do? Number 4, lack of financial visibility to drive decision-making. Again, can't stress enough, as you're running a business and growing a business, having aggressive goals, how are you going to be able to make a decision to guide and steer the company when you can't look at the facts and have everything on one screen or one sheet of paper without, losing hair or having it turn gray in the process? And then number 5, which I think is probably the most important one, is, well, I'll let Laura attest or correct me on that one, but difficulty adapting to new business requirements, AKA no customization. I think if you've been following along, you've noticed that this whole case study, they've been taking a square peg and putting it into a round hole, right? And, Checkpoint Surgical is Checkpoint Surgical, and they are evolving with their client and account base, growing their sales force, new processes are getting built, and taking how their company's been working and how they want to run their company and making it fit into a box that is very limited, just isn't really setting yourself up for success, right? So, having something that is customizable to the way that you do business, and then letting the software do the hard work for you, right? Let it do its work, and you focus on how you want it to process things, right? And build those workflows out. So those were the 5 signs that we really drove home during this presentation. I'm sure some of these sound familiar if you're interested enough to register and join this webinar. Steve, Laura, did we have any additional notes or comments on this while we're right here?
No, I don't. Thank you, though.
Perfect. Going into, now we have questions, right? I mean, we covered quite a bit, and I've been monitoring our chat. We didn't have any questions come in directly from our viewers and attendees, but one thing I did note that we probably just overlooked a little bit, but you mentioned eventually planning for an ERP implementation and making some sort of transition because you had such growth already planned and aggressive goals. But you talked about it being an easy transition and the onboarding. but let's talk a little bit about financing and what really made it. So you have all these symptoms that are making it, you need to make some sort of decision, but what was there any sort of opportunities through it being an Oracle software that really made it a no-brainer?
Yeah, like I said, the financing, and I believe it was 6 months of deferred payments. I believe, or was it? I think it was all of it. The payments were deferred, not just the interest. It made it, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, which made it really attractive. But the ability, like I said, to finance it and pay monthly, it's, you know, QuickBooks isn't all that cheap when you when you get bigger and you have add-ons and other third-party softwares and the number of seats you need to get. So it made it easier to kind of compare apples to oranges when you're looking at a financing monthly payment versus a big upfront payment, which we did not have to make.
Yep.
So that made it very affordable for us.
On that same line, Laura, what can you tell us or share about the scalability of the NetSuite licensing as well? Because I know how Checkpoint approached it was that you didn't just jump in for the entire organization when you first did it, and you took a much more scaled approach to it. So talk a little bit about that as well, if you could.
Right, that's a good point. So when we first started this, we were just implementing the financials portion, and we did that, and we went live, and the licensing included some discounts, right, during this 3-year contract period. And subsequently, we decided to move forward with the CRM, which would mean we need seats for all of the whole entire sales force and sales management. So we were able to add them on mid-contract using the same discounts that we saw the first time. And it was easy, right? We didn't have to have everybody at first. We could, at any time, we can add additional seats as we need. So it was really great to work with Oracle on that. They make it easy.
Awesome. Great.
That's a great point. It's a great point. Well, I don't know, Steve, Laura, I think we've reached the end of our webinar.
Yep.
Laura, thank you so much for your time and your insight. And I think you brought a tremendous amount of value to this presentation. So I can't thank you enough. From myself, Steve, and the whole World Synergy team. Thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate it.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Laura, David, really appreciate it. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed the time that we've spent with you today. I hope you have a great day. And if anybody has any additional questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We're happy to chat.
Absolutely. And in closing, this will be the completion of our webinar, 5 Signs Your Company has Outgrown QuickBooks. We have some information here up on the screen. If you had any additional questions or had a comment to share as well of some insight or a similar situation, you see our channel is here. We will be submitting and sending out the recorded portion of this video for your reference after the fact. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch in regards to our next upcoming webinar. Until then, have a great afternoon and a great upcoming holiday. Thank you all.